And tonight's host on Family Heirlooms, here he is, it's IVER BEANPAIDALOT. Hello and welcome to Family Heirlooms, where this week we visit Mr Tweed in his garage. So let's go and meet him. God, there's a lot of crap in here, isn't there? Hello Mr Tweed, good to meet you. And I hear you have a lot of family heirlooms for your daughter. Yes, Ivor, and yeah, this is the latest. Oh, what is that, Mr Tweed? It's an indexable rotary head. Oh, and how much? Oh, it weighs about 55 pounds. Huh? Well, she's a very lucky daughter. And well, what does she say? What does your daughter say to you? My daughter? Oh no, Dad, not another piece of shit. Yeah, thank you, Mr Tweed. Well, it's been a pleasure. And that's all from Family Heirlooms this week. See you next week. Bye. Right, start the cab. Where's my bag of money? Hello and welcome to Tweed's Garage, where in this episode, good things. We go to a closed down factory sale and pick up some family heirlooms, and we also go to the watercress line. Unfortunately no film, but we picked up another family heirloom. So yeah, have a look at that. But the other news is engine back in the Excelsior and attempts to start it. So come on, grab yourself a brew, sit down and enjoy. Let's go! So I had a little trip out to Andover to a factory that had closed down, and they were sort of selling all the equipment and tooling that was left there. So I popped down to have a look. It's always sad when you go into these factories and look around and think these places, you know, sort of probably supplied employment for quite a few people, and they're all gone and the machines were just sitting there. They were quite old machines, most of them. There was a couple of sort of banks of multi-drills that were quite impressive, and a bandsaw, and they had a sort of an engineering side and a sheet metal work side. So I had a little wander around there and a look. But the nicest thing they had, although it was sort of grubby, needed a good clean, was a SIP jig borer. Not a huge one. If any of you follow Cutting Edge Engineering, he's got a number 6, which is sort of a lovely piece of machinery. I think this one's an earlier one, slightly smaller. But even though it was covered in muck, you moved the hand wheels and just everything moved with, you know, typical, yeah, Swiss accuracy. And I'm not sure what the increments were on the hand wheels when you turned them, but you could hardly see it moving, you know, so whether it's thousandths of an inch, I don't know. But I've put a little film of the dials up here, so if anybody knows, let us know. But yeah, it was a lovely thing, but luckily for my daughter, it didn't become a family heirloom because I just haven't got the space to put it anywhere. So yeah, so we had a look round, a little rummage about, and then got a pile of stuff that we wanted and done a deal. And yeah, so this is some of the stuff I picked up. So this is the main thing I went for. It's a 2 feet by 1.5 foot surface plate. Yeah, really pleased with it because it sort of sits on the bench. It becomes part of the bench. Hopefully it doesn't get too much rubbish thrown on it, but useful for a surface plate, but also useful for assembling things that you want a nice flat surface to do that on. So that's that. It was a bit of a stake. Probably paid a little bit too much for it, but sort of made up for other bits and bobs that I picked up. Gave it a good stoning over the top because, as usual, somebody used it as a bloody hammering bench. They should be crucified, really, if you ever do that. Yeah, but still pretty flat and useful for me. Accurate enough for me. I have got a smaller surface plate which sort of sits up there, and then I can pull it down to sort of use it, but I never do. It sits up there, and the bench is never clear enough to put it down. So this beastie boy here demands its own space, so a lot more useful. So as well as the surface plate, picked up some nice tooling as well, some big reamers. This is 1 inch, 15/16, 5/8, tapered reamer, and a few other small ones but quite long ones. some indexable lathe tools, two nice boring bars. This one's been a bit ground to make clearance, but this one's a really long one. Yeah, foot long boring bar. So nice sturdy boring bar, and then a couple, three other right-handed tool. These are Sandvik. That's a Sandvik. This is a Sandvik as well. And this one's German. Not quite sure what to make, but it takes small shaped tips for O-ring grooving, but also they do sort of square section ones as well. So quite a handy little tool for putting rebates inside boards. And then some involute cutters. Probably never use them, but you know, they were there, so we picked up a few sort of selection. There wasn't a full set, but useful to have. You never know, might turn up a gear one day. So there's a selection of those, and then a sort of selection of slitting saws, different thicknesses, all sharp, all in good order, and then sort of three new ones or resharpened ones still in their protective packaging. Old style parting off tool, but always useful, and then some parting off blades for some of the other ones that I've got, just spare ones. And then a nice set of drill blanks, and I don't think, judging by the condition, I don't think they've been used. So that was a nice little purchase, and I've used it already, so already come in handy. So that's the tooling. So we also picked up materials as well. A lifetime supply of Paxolin, different sized sheets, and then quite a huge bit. Got a lot of holes drilled in it, but you know, you can cut bits off and use that. It's not a problem. A little tray for heat treating stuff. I'll show you what I've got to go in there. Picked up some steel rod, stainless steel. Yeah, nice clamp. And then some stainless steel sheet, and then some flame cut stuff, handy for using as a clamp or as raw material. Piece of aluminium boxing might come in handy for things, and then some sheet aluminium, reasonable size thicknesses, and this jig plate that I can cut up and use for projects. Oh, and a little wheel that was under one of the benches that had got lost, and I felt sorry for it, so I brought it home. Never know, might get used on something. And then some bar stock, steel bar stock, got some steel round, good length of it. And the same, some hex steel, and then some square as well. And already tucked away in the metal store, and I've used this already, some stainless steel bar, another piece of steel stock, very large piece of steel stock, and then this big bar of whether it's PVC or Delrin, I don't know, but always useful for projects, you know. And it was sitting there going spare, it would have got thrown away, so I rescued it. Oh, and another bit of steel bar down the bottom there. So a good haul of stock. So I can buy it when I need it, normally order it on eBay, but the price of steel is going up all the time, so I sort of grabbed all this, you know, and all this will last me quite a long time before I get through this. So quite a good haul. So let's take this clamp, show you the other clamp. Found this huge soldering iron. I mean, brilliant for doing motorcycle cables, but tin plate work, sheet metal work. And it works. I've checked all the wiring, plugged it in, and it's warming up nicely, so that's a nice little tool to have. Like Simon in New Zealand, must have been thinking on the same plane. Picked up one of these pump action grease guns. They're very good. I've got a smaller one. This one, this is just a sort of Chinese made one, small one. It works fine, but they are handy for some of the grease points you can't get a gun onto, or just handy for sort of sticking in a toolbox and taking with you. This looks like quite a good quality one. So yeah, grease gun. And this is what the metal tray was for. castanet case hardening powder, 2 tins I think. It's sort of been used. It doesn't wear out that much. A bit ropey, but quite usable, and really a lifetime supply for me. See, but it's the original stuff, and as we all know, the original stuff is better. Anything made in European countries nowadays is absolutely hopeless, whether it's sort of stuff like this, workshop chemicals, cleaning, degreasing, weed killer. Yeah, it's all rubbish nowadays. So grab these, tuck these away, and we'll be able to case harden till I'm popping up daisies. And then these 2 boxes, rescued these, just like them, little red boxes with lids on. This one's got the latch, this one's missing, but in them picked up a whole load of clamps along with this U-shaped one for setting up jobs on the mill. Really useful. I've got all these, a couple more bits of these were used for spacers I think, but more steel stock for turning stuff up. Clamps here, and then a nice little small angle plate, quite useful. I've got some big ones, these ones, but they are monsters, and you don't necessarily need them that big all the time. So there's those, and then I just picked these up as well. They were sitting on under a bench. Some index plates, which whenever you buy equipment like rotary tables and stuff like that, these plates are always missing. So I thought, well, I'll grab some anyway. You never know if they might come in useful. But then watching Facebook Marketplace, like you do, I found another family heirloom that I've picked up. This is a rotary indexing head rather than a rotary table that sort of has the round table that you put stuff on. This normally has, it's missing, but it's something I'll have to try and pick up. I'll have a look at my chucks, but yeah, these are three jaw chuck on it, or a 4-jaw chuck to hold the workpiece. But the main thing I got this for, even if it didn't work with the index plates, was it's got a drop-in lock, and it's got 24 indent positions, so you can do more than, I've got those collet holders, the 6-sided and the square and the 4-sided collet blocks that I use for making nuts and bolts and things like that, which are okay, but because you're moving them in the vise and resting them in, they're not always sitting 100% accurately. So it'd be nice to get something that sort of do it a bit more accurately. So this has got the drop-in pin, so you move it to the position you want, and then it locks in place, not to go anywhere. Do your machining, pop your pin out, round to wherever you want the next one, drop it in, do your machining like that. And also this whole head moves through, well, 100 degrees actually. See on the side it. Yeah, so, but I've only just got it, so I'm not 100% au fait with all the levers and knobs on it, but I suspect you slacken off these clamp bolts and then somehow move it. There's a way of disengaging and engaging the lead screw as well for the drive. But yeah, and I think it has a facility to sort of be driven on the back, so you can sort of do spiral gear cutting. I think that's way over my maths, but anyway. So this is it. It's got the one index plate on it. Like I say, I've sort of picked some index plates up there. They might be able to be butchered to go on here. Some of them will fit. They're a little bit smaller, but I know one of them is homemade as well. So it does show you can make them. So it's not the end of the world that it's only got the one plate. So yeah, so there we go. Another little treasure trove of stuff picked up. Oh, the daughter will be impressed when she hears what I've bought for her in the future. So this is it after I've given it a clean down, getting all those years of grime off of it. And found a pleasant surprise I was worrying about not having enough index wheels for it, but it actually has, it's 2-sided this one, so it's got another set of holes on the other side. So there it is. I've cleared off all the years of grime that it's collected, and it's sort of come up quite nicely. Done a little bit of servicing on it, sort of adjusted the backlash in there, and removed the jam locking pin from here, so this now locks. This locks the head here once you've got it in position to stop any movement when you're machining, and it also moves up and down as well. Try and do it one-handed. So yeah, really pleased with that. I think it'll come in more use than the rotary table, to be honest, because it's mainly round stuff that I want to put multiple faces on, so this will get used a lot. I'll just try and source a 3-jaw chuck for it, which shouldn't be too difficult. So yeah, another bit of workshop junk. I knew it was dangerous announcing to the world that the primary cover had gone on and we wouldn't be going in there again, because as you can see the cover is off and we're back in there again. The trouble is there was 3 problems that I was having with the clutch. The one, I couldn't get it to release. It was taking a sort of Herculean effort to try and move it, and then also the push rods are too short. It has 3. It has this outer one with a little mushroom on that pushes this out. This one here has that one. Has a long one that goes from there to the other side of the gearbox, and then a short one that goes from the kickstart side of the gearbox just under the clutch release arm. And when I took it apart, there was ball bearings in there to take up the slack to make it fit. So I just thought it had the wrong rods in there. But I did find a piece in the bottom of the gearbox, if you go back to the stripping this engine down video, that I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I think that was a piece that somebody had made up to go in to get this to work. The other thing with this, when I took it apart, was the screws were quite a way out, and that would make sense. That was the only way this clutch would work, but unfortunately that leads to this, where the screws loose themselves off and then they were eating themselves out of the case. The manual says that the screws should be done all the way down, so with the springs the screws should go on, these screws should go on, and they should bear down on these spigots or on these posts, with the springs underneath them. So but there was another problem with this. It was rubbing as well. Now it was rubbing when I took it apart. You could see that this plate had been rubbing against the friction plate in the middle. It was just sort of grinding there. And when you looked at this plate, this surface here, this bearing surface, is at an angle. It's not parallel. It's at a slight angle, and because it's sort of higher on the inside than it is on the outside, this was rubbing against that. Even with the new corks in it, was still rubbing. So I did sort of stick it on the lathe and just take that down parallel with the rest of the plate. Which sort of cured that problem, but it just didn't seem right. So I phoned Villiers Spares up and explained my problem and told him about this angled friction plate on the outside, and he said no, they should be parallel. So we couldn't work out whether it was worn that way or whether it was, you know, or what it was. So I said, well, send me a new plate. He had some new old stock plates, so a new one turned up. I managed to wrestle it out of the greased paper, which I think had been on there for about 50 years, and it was a eureka moment. So this is the old one, and you see it's dished and it's got that angle on it, but it does fit. And this is the new one, so which goes on there like that. There's many differences. The first thing, it's flat, it's not dished. So that dishing there compresses the springs by a sort of coil and a half. So that was the trouble I was getting with the springs collapsing down completely and not being able to release the clutch. Then the next problem is that it's not flat. This one is flat, goes on there lovely like that. and it's got racing holes in it as well. Now I think that's to sort of let the oil get to the corks. So even though that may have worked, it's not the correct one. How does this happen? Well, Villiers made their own engines, but I suspect, like a lot of the companies at the time and bike manufacturers, they didn't make their own gearbox internals. So they probably bought them in from one of the gearbox manufacturers like Berman, Albion or Sturmey Archer. And they probably made multiple different types of clutches for this sort of gear arrangement, and just through whether it's been restored at some time and just it was a box of bits and somebody's built it up from that, or whether, you know, they needed to keep it running, so they got an old piece from somewhere else and stuck it in. I don't know. And the other thing, this one had rebates on the back side of the plate for springs like that, which I always thought was odd. You see, for the springs to bear down on and not move about. So this clutch has the springs on the inner side, not the outer side. I thought it was how they machined the plate, that for some reason, you know, they were rebated and put there and drilled, I don't know. But this new plate, you can see, has got rebates for the springs to sit on and not wander about. And it's a darn sight easier to get the screws started when you put the springs on. Like that. And we'll put another one on as well, show you the clutch action. There we go, one there, one there. And then if I operate the clutch, or a makeshift clutch lever on a piece of copper tube, you can see it now releases nicely and there's plenty of space behind the springs. And so that's cured that problem. The other problem I had was you're meant to set the forward and back motion to about 1 thou on the clutch input shaft, but it was moving backwards and forwards quite merrily, and doing the adjustment nut up, it was done all the way in. It wasn't touching the back of the shaft, but when I checked the parts list and had a good look at it, there was a washer missing on this side under the adjusting screw. So I turned up a new washer, popped that in, and now I've got adjustment. I've got sort of about 1 thou movement on there now, so that sorted that as well. So hopefully the clutch should work really well once we bolt it back together. But I'm not putting the cover on till I fired the engine up and make sure it engages, disengages, and the kickstart works as it should. I don't think I videoed it when I installed them, but this is the new crank lip seals that have gone into those machinings that I'd done on the crankcase. So if I ever needed to change them, they're quite easy to get to, and just hook them out and push some new ones in. So another job to tackle was these adjusters, these sort of later style chain adjusters that were on this bike. So they're, you know, on the other side of the nut here, and the trouble is they were resting on the back of the frame dropouts here, but they should be, for these, they should be parallel at the end so that this sort of stays straight. But because it's at an angle, this leans over, and when they've been adjusted, it's bent these out of shape. But on the frame there is a lug here, and looking on old photos of Excelsiors, I managed to see that there was a nut and bolt assembly that went on here and pushed the wheel back that way. Not sure whether there was a hole here originally and somebody's opened it up, or if this is the way they were and they just had a bolt and 2 lock nuts to keep the bolt in position, and then that's quite possibly why they're not on the bike anymore. You know, it's easy for them to vibrate loose and fall out. So got busy on the lathe turning a solution up and come up with these. So it's stainless steel bolt, stainless steel nut, and then this this sort of T-nut type arrangement is made out of mild steel, and then that slots in the frame like that. And because it's got a flat, you can turn it down like that and run the lock nut down like that. But what I'll do is I will run a small bead of weld on each side of this to keep this in place so that it will never fall out and go down the road again. I've re-secured these rivets because there was a little bit of play between the inner part of the flywheel and the outer part, just by peeling them over with a hammer. And to release the flywheel, you undo it a certain amount, and then the nut is captive, so it acts like a puller on the flywheel, so it goes tight again, and then you undo it till the flywheel pops, and then just slowly undo it. Got a new set of points. The lower points plate was incorrect for this motor. The top arm was fine, and in fact I went back with the original one because the actual pad on the new one, this pad, was a little bit too high. It could have been filed down a bit, but the actual points hadn't been used, hadn't fired, so they're in, you know, they're in reasonable condition. But the reason was because this was too high, it was making contact at full extension on the top of this piece of steel, this sort of core for the magneto coils. It was hitting on there. So this one, it gives it enough clearance to open up without touching. So put that one back in, new points plate. Made a nut for it. This is because it's electrical and old English, it's a BA thread, so it's a 4BA. Made a 4BA nut. Redone the terminal. The terminal was originally put on this screw, but the trouble is that takes the coil wire straight to earth, and the other one's the condenser, straight to earth. So it wouldn't have worked. Because it was just shorting out. So this back plate, this lower points plate, needs to be insulated. So I turned up a little peg that goes through, but that needs insulating. It's actually bolted against a Paxilin plate which insulates it, and then this screw I turned up a Paxilin washer with a shoulder on it so it goes through the slot on the points. But insulates this screw from the points. And then the other thing was the way they had the wires routing through, they'd missed running them through the channel. You put a bit of old crimp insulator around the wire, and the edge of it was too high and it wouldn't let it go down in its channel, so it sat below this Paxilin insulating plate. And instead it was all being squashed under the points. So with that done, new points and the wiring redone and insulated, it now sparks quite nicely, but I can't spark it at the moment because I'm just trying to find top dead centre to put the flywheel back on, and we need to check the points gap. I'm going to go for about 15 thou on the points. So pop the flywheel back on. This mark on the flywheel indicates roughly top dead centre, and I'll move you back later. I've got a dial indicator at the top just to get it sort of spot on. Yeah, so let's go ahead and put the flywheel back on. So the points are operated by this cam on the inside of the flywheel there, and there's some marks that it lines up. It's got, I showed you earlier on another video, but there's a mark there. There's a mark there that lines up with a mark here, but I'll take you around there. Just open the points up so we don't catch it under there. There we go. So first thing to do is just move this round, get the highest opening on the points, set the points gap. About there. 15th thou feeler gauge. A little bit tight. Slacken off the mounting post. And then move the cam plate. Bit more. About there. Go with that. Tighten it back up again. Okay. So I get the top dead centre. I'll turn the crank over by moving the sprocket the other side. About there. And then pulling the flywheel off the taper, just move it so it lines up with the marks on there against the crankcase mark. Check we haven't moved it. Yep, spot on, that'll do. About there. There, just push it home on the taper. Just do the nut up gently. So it's bearing on the taper. And then Villiers actually do a spanner that's got a sort of flat end to it that you pound with a hammer to get it onto the, to bed it down on the taper, but I'm going to use the impact wrench. Yeah, that's not going anywhere. Yep, spot on, that'll do. See if we can get a spark. Nice. So before I could put the engine in, as usual with everything on this bike, it was sort of a bit of a mishmash of nuts and bolts. I needed some washers. They had some spring washers, but I needed some washers to go under the bolt so it doesn't damage the engine casing. So I just sort of fired the lathe up and parted a few off, and then once they were done, had the satisfying job of oil blacking them. So you just heat them up to cherry red and then drop them in engine oil. Preferably old diesel oil works really well. So you can see they've got a nice black finish on there. So with those I could proceed to wrestle the engine in. It didn't take too much wrestling, to be honest with you. Got it into position, dropped in the bolts, and done it all up, ready for the big moment of trying to start it. I haven't connected the clutch cable yet, or the renewed the throttle cable, because I'm looking at getting another set of handlebars for it. Once I've got those, then I'll work out the lengths of cable I need and make them up accordingly. I took the carb apart just to check that the jets were clear and it wasn't going to cause a problem. But to be honest with you, there's not a lot in there. There's 2 jets and they were both clear. So I put them all back together and I just soaked the fuel bowl and the choke lever in thinners and then paraffin to try and get some of the fuel lacquer off. But it took ages. It was sort of like glue and nothing seemed to touch it. But managed to get it off after about a week of soaking in paraffin. And then popped it all back together. So the last job on the cylinder head to do was just to grind it in, although I'd skimmed it, just to make it a more gas tight fit. So this was done just by sort of smearing a very fine grinding paste around the top of the barrel where it mates the cylinder head, and then just sort of moving it side to side in a rotary motion just to make it more of a gas tight fit, and then bolted it down. I turned some new washers up as well to go under the head bolts just to spread the load on the cylinder head, because when I took it off before where it had been done down really tight, I did machine them down flat first. So another job to do was fit the new seat cover I'd got to replace the tatty one that was on it. It wasn't worth saving. The PVC had gone hard and it was starting to sort of fall apart. So you can actually pick up new ones of these, which is surprising. So took the saddle off, unpicked the old one, which didn't take a lot of doing, and then sat on the floor and wrestled with the new seat cover. It sort of took a while to fathom out how it goes on, but basically you sort of curl the little steel tabs around the frame of the seat and try and pull them tight. I just use a pair of needle nose pliers to sort of pull them tight and just keep working them round until they've gone right round the frame as sort of a tighter fit as I could get them. Started off at the back, got the back edge done, and then folded the sides round and done the sides, finishing right up at the front of the saddle to get it to fit, and then bolted it back on. And as you can see, looks quite smart. And whether it was a bigger saddle cover on that was on there originally, but the other one came right and was sitting on the tank here, but we've got a nice gap between the tank and the frame, so that fits nicely. And we turned up some new bolts because it was just sort of a couple of metric bolts were bunged in there, bolts and washers and nuts. So I turned up some new ones to make it look a bit neater, and also with a shouldered bolt on there, it should hold the springs a bit more securely. So I've got it back together and the engine in the frame, so the only thing to do now is see if it's going to start after all that work. And I've got this old oil can here and it's filled with petrol oil mix, and it's got about enough in it to do about 3 bowlfuls. So we'll top it up via the input for the petrol and kick it over and see what happens. So there you go, a smorgasbord of stuff to look at, looking at tools and bits and bobs that we picked up, and shock horror, a vehicle actually working. So things are on the up. Off to the Riley next. See you next time. Cheerio. Right, where'd I put all the bits for the Riley? So there you go. It's an indexable. It's an indexable. Join us next week when we go and see Gordon and his collection of milk bottle tops.